All right. Hi, welcome back to another, quick, a Telegram video for H2 history this time. It's been a while again since we've done this, but hey, here we are, right? And I decided to shoot this, back to back with the GP video. So, watch that and then watch this, right? So you can prepare for your A levels or promos. So, what we're going to talk about today, very quickly, is really about sussing out a source's reliability. So, in the first place, right, when we are trying to determine whether or not a source is reliable, okay, then you guys might have different instructions, certain mnemonic devices to help frame your thinking and all that given by your other, by your school teachers and all. That's great, but we need to understand the rationale for certain things that we do. So whatever variation that your school gives you, by all means, go ahead and use them, but make sure that, you understand why you are explaining certain things, and make sure that you flesh out all the nuances of the source itself. And ultimately, of course, I hope that this video benefits you. Now, when we are trying to understand the source's reliability, and then of course to ultimately flesh out its usefulness, right, I too teach my students a mnemonic device, which is CPRU. All right, but what this is meant to do is really to make sure that the sequencing of your explanation is there, because ultimately, the way that you flesh out a source's reliability and usefulness must be based on the first two letters. So very quickly, what do the letters stand for then? C stands for CK, contextual knowledge. And by contextual knowledge, I don't mean, whatever that's sorry, let me rephrase that. I don't just mean whatever that's happening around or during that date itself, but also, in relation to the contents of the source. So whatever that the source is talking about, and the date itself, that should help you pinpoint exactly which CK you need to use, all right, for your Part B analysis. P stands for purpose. Now, to be absolutely clear, right? When we use CK in our reliability analysis, we are not using it to prove that a source is correct. What that means is that we are not trying to corroborate the accuracy of the source in relation to the contextual knowledge. No, 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 no. The contextual knowledge is what helps you, as its name suggests, contextualize the source. That means help you understand what's happening at the point of time when this source is being produced, or when this source, in a context of a secondary source, right? What this source is trying to flesh out, explain, and talk about, essentially. So the CK is incredibly important because, I mean, for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously it helps with your marks, right? Because that's what Cambridge examiners are really looking for, the contextual knowledge there. But more importantly, the CK influences the purpose. What that means, in short, is that whatever that's happening at a point of time influences how the source is written and produced, and what the source is intended. Oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. What the intentions of the sources are. So once we have sussed out the CK itself and explain how it influences that particular source, that's how we get the purpose, because the purpose has a specific intended outcome. Your reliability must be based on the purpose and its intended outcome. it should not just solely be based on the audience nor the provenance. The main thing that determines whether a source is reliable or not is the purpose. So that's why the CPR framework is there, so that you have that sort of a structured way of looking at things. You have the contextual knowledge, which influences the purpose, which in turn influences the reliability or determines the reliability. And then from there, right, after you flesh out the source's reliability, that's where the U comes in, because the U stands for utility or usefulness lah. Okay. And of course, R stands for reliability. All right. So in terms of fleshing out the utility of the source, obviously, number one is whether or not it's useful is based on, partly at least, on whether or not the source is reliable. But ultimately, what truly determines a source's utility? It is whether or not it provides a few things. Number one, multiple perspectives in answering the question. And of course, number two, whether or not there are any limitations in terms of its utility. That means, like, if you can use it in one particular way, in what other ways can you use it for, essentially, right? So if, let's say, I were to apply it in this context for source A, using source A as an example for the demonstration, we know that source A, it says here, according to the reliable information of the USSR government, events in Korea were provoked by an attack on borders of North Korea by forces of the South Korean authorities. Essentially, the source is saying or suggesting that the Soviet government, affirmed its traditional principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. That means they choose not to, or rather they are saying that they are not intervening in this affair whatsoever, right? Which kind of divests them of any responsibility. And at the same time, it is not correct that the Soviet government refused to participate in the SC meetings. For some context, the year that the Korean War started, the USSR, or at least the day that the Korean War started, and around that period, the USSR did not turn up for any SC meetings, right? In reality, really, it's meant to boycott it. So as much as the Soviet government would have liked, it was impossible to take part since a permanent member, China, has not been admitted to the council. Okay. So now we look at the provenance. Statement by the Soviet government delivered by Andrei Gromyko, of all people, obviously, to the US ambassador. So we know the audience, we know who produced it, okay, the source of the source, and more significantly, the date. So how we apply our explanation here is this. This source was, a statement given to the US ambassador by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs 4 days after the outbreak of the Korean War. So we know that the Korean War started on June 25th, right? That is the context. So 4 days after, the outbreak of the Korean War, USA was at the same time attempting to gather a coalition force, to try and stop, the North Korean invasion of South Korea. So that context, whatever that's happening in that situation, right, in turn influences the purpose. So in other words, how you would phrase it would be, this source was written in the context of, the immediate outbreak of the Korean War. As a result, what this source would be trying to do would be to attempt to gaslight the American ambassadors or the American ambassador and USA on the Soviet intentions, in order to remove responsibility and suspicion from themselves, in relation to their role in the Korean War. And that in turn meant that the intended outcome was to ensure or to at least try and prevent USA from taking a more active stance on the Korean War itself. And that's what makes this source unreliable, because then it would inevitably focus more on the fact, or rather, they would focus on how little responsibility they should take for the war itself. So that's how we know that this is an unreliable source, because we know the context that influences the purpose of the source, why it's produced, what it's meant to do, and that in turn leads to the reliability. And in terms of usefulness, here, obviously, if you just base the usefulness on the reliability alone, it's not useful. But at the same time, we also can understand that this source is useful insofar as understanding Soviet sort of approach to, their foreign policy when it comes to any of these proxy conflicts. So to summarize here, basically to suss out a source's reliability and usefulness, use the CPRU framework. If you are so inclined to, if you're still feeling very confused about trying to understand, the thought processes underpinning the explanation of reliability itself. And, so if you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a text, arrange a consult. Yes, we do free consults, right? And with no obligation whatsoever if you do not wish to join us for the longer term for weekly tuition lessons. But yeah, hope this helps, and see you guys next time.